Hey everyone. In the last episode, we saw something that was not very comfortable, especially if you're coming from a C Sharp Java background. A variable can start with a number and then take a string, and also it's totally fine to take a float and then it can become a Boolean, right? So the obvious question is we are not defining data types. What are the data types JavaScript allows us to use? So let's flip to Visual Studio and understand all these data types which JavaScript allows us to use. Basically, there are two types of data types in JavaScript. One is primitive and non-primitive. Let's understand each of the primitive type here, and then we'll come to non-primitive one. Both of them are very important, and we will be using them in day-to-day web development journey. Okay, so if you're coming from a .NET background or C Sharp, understand primitive means value type. Objects are reference types. Exactly the way we used to create in our application when we are working with C Sharp Java, right? Integer is a value type. Object or classes are reference type in Java in C Sharp as well. So here, let's start with string, and we'll go and understand each of them one by one. When it comes to understanding the primitive type, first one is, as I already told you, string. String is nothing but the sequence of character that represents a text value. So let's start with assigning a value, right? There are three different ways we can assign a value to a string type. So const name equals to, within single quote, you can give whatever name or value you want to. The other way, the second way to assign a value is using double quotes. Let's say JavaScript. And the third way is using backticks. Backticks, you know, right? And the third way to define to assign a value to the same string type is using backtick. So backtick, as you know, just below the keyword of escape, you will find the backtick. And all of these three will work exactly the same way, right? Now let me run this and see what value we get in the console. So we have defined and declared a string type and assigned value in three different ways, right? Single quote, double quote, and using backtick. Let's save this file using control backtick and run the program and see what result we get. As you see, all three returns the string value. So you have to remember in string data type, there are three ways we can assign values. Now let's move on to the number. Coming to second primitive type, which is number. In JavaScript, number represents more than just an integer. If you're coming from a C Sharp background, you know these all are different data types, right? Integer, long, float, double, decimal. But in JavaScript, all of them are one. Even 25 is a number, 99.99 is a number, minus 10 is a number, and even 0.0001 is a number, which represents decimal in our C Sharp coding. So let's see how it actually works. So you see, const sum equals to 5 and const pi equals to 3.14, and both of them are going to represent a number in JavaScript, which will be different in different languages, right? Now, if you see this example, let me run the code and show you how actually JavaScript behaves differently, right? Now, look at that. Point 1 plus point 2 becomes this. Why? Because internally, JavaScript stores these decimals in a binary format. We will come to all these things because if you don't understand these, small part, you'll always going to feel, JavaScript is very irritating. Ideally, the value should have been zero point 0.3, but why it becomes like that? Largely because of the same concept which I just told you, that it stores decimals in the binary format. All those things we will discuss in a greater detail. Especially these things become very important. Let's say if you're doing a financial calculation or something like that, we'll talk about it. Let's now move on to the third primitive type, which is Boolean. After going through the tricky number data type, which is part of primitive data type, let's talk about Boolean, which is something behaves exactly the way you would expect. It represents true and false. It helps us to come up with a decision. Everything in programming has to be decided somewhere. So whenever a true or false condition we want to put, we use Boolean. And fortunately, it behaves exactly the way we think or we have been using in C Sharp or Java. So let's say this example. As I said, Boolean represents two value, either true or false. So const is active is true, const is logged in is false. And if you log this, let me save and run this and see what it represents. Both represents Boolean, right? So it is probably one of the simplest data type in JavaScript. Now, it is really good to use when we are using in a condition. If age is 20 and we want to check if somebody is above 80 will be called adult or not, then we can use this condition in the term of Boolean, right? Let's run and see how it behaves. As you see, oh, so sorry, I missed out on saving the button. So make sure to save and then run the application. Now you see true, right? Had this been after understanding Boolean, let's understand undefined. So undefined basically represents the value which has not been assigned yet. You have declared a variable, but the value has not been assigned. If you see here, you have defined the result variable, but There's no value out there. And that's why what JavaScript represents that is any. We can basically assign anything out there. Okay, let's run this and see how it actually behaves. You see, undefined, right? It's nothing but the value is yet to be assigned. Nothing else. This is not an error. Don't get me wrong. It's not an error. It's just a data type which represents the value is yet to be assigned. You can also think of a undefined as a placeholder which is basically waiting for the value, right? A variable is there, but its value is not yet assigned. It's not empty, not zero, not null. Now, next one is null. Let's understand null, how it actually works. Now let's talk about null data type, which often gets confused with undefined, which is not the case. Null represents an intentional absence of value. We have declared a variable, but we have deliberately, assigned null. We don't want any values out there. So there is no data. It is again not undefined, zero, null, nothing. It is simply telling that JavaScript that we have intentionally allowed null to be passed on to this particular value. Now, to save and run this program, you'll see something very strange. The type of this data, which is actually null, is saying object. But don't get confused. It is not an object type. It is you can say it's kind of a bug which has been there since 1995. Null was given an internal tag as object since 1995, and that's why even because of this design decision, even today type of null returns object. But don't get confused. Null even today represents a primitive data type. As of now, we will ignore these two primitive types. But just to make you clear, that BigInt is also an integer. Only thing is that when you want to go beyond the cipher limit defined in JavaScript for an integer, at that time we make use of it. So if you run this code and you see, I mean, let's say you are gonna see what is the maximum value JavaScript allows, you will get the value as this much, right? But now if you want to go beyond this, then you've got to use bigger data type, and that will go beyond the safer limit. Okay, we will ignore symbol as of now, but we'll come to this because if I explain you this now, then things will be even more complicated, and that's not even very necessary and common in usage. We'll come to that, but definitely. Now let's talk about. Up until now, we have understood primitive data type, string, number, boolean, and so on. If we exclude number, all of these primitive data type behave exactly the way it would behave in C#, right? Now, but before understanding the non-primitive one, we have got to have these kind of understanding. Reference variable, how memory are managed internally in JavaScript. All these things are very crucial. If you don't understand that, we wouldn't be able to understand how object is going to behave with JavaScript. Arrays are object, functions are object, dates are object. Almost everything complex is an object in JavaScript, and that's where it becomes very different from how we have been doing. How we have been using objects in C#. So let's come back in the next video and see how those things actually behave and work. Up till then, please do some hands-on. Whatever we have discussed in this video, let's try to code it on your own in the VS Code. And finally, we'll meet in the next video.